Welcome back to another quick tip on Power BI Tips. We have another Microsoft PM joining us today. I'd like to introduce you to Sujata. Welcome to the channel. I really appreciate you being here today. We have an exciting demo for Translytical. What is Translytical? How does this work? How can you get Power BI to write data back to a storage account or a SQL database and then get that back into your reports? So Sujata, take it away.
Yeah, so first of all, thank you, Mike, for having me on the channel. I'm super excited to be here today. And honestly, I'm very personally excited to share about Translytical. I think that it's going to change the way that people think about reports. I know many of us, we're not just looking at data just for fun, but we're looking at it to actually take action. And I think with Translytical, it's all about streamlining and automating that action directly within the report. So really empowering end users to make data-driven decisions so much faster than ever before. And so what I'm going to show today is look at a bunch of cool demos. So I'm going to first show examples of what are Translytical task flows rather than me just explaining it. And then I'm going to show you how I built many of these different Translytical task flows. And I want to also emphasize here, Mike, I'm not a coder, so that should be very telling of this is something that, especially with a lot of the Gen AI experiences around GitHub Copilot, it is a lot more achievable to do, even if you don't have as much of recent coding background. And for me, I haven't personally coded in 9 years. So yeah, with that, let me switch to the screen and look through a couple of demos of some of the end user capabilities it can do. And so in this first scenario, I'm showcasing how you can use Translytical task flows for annotations and like annotations that appear directly on the report. And I know this is oftentimes a feedback we hear from a lot of report creators is like either A, they want their end users to be able to add additional context, to the data points, or they want to be able to provide that additional context from the get-go. And this is allowing both the creator and the end user to go do that. And so I'll start first here of, let's say I'm looking at various opportunities over the last calendar year, and I want to go and add certain annotations. So let's say I want to add an annotation for the month of July. So I just simply click on a data point here for July, and I can just add a comment of maybe I knew there was like a 10% discount that we gave. And so I just submit that comment. And then what I'm going to do here is when I click the button to submit comment, this is actually in the background running a user data function. And that user data function is not only taking the context of filters on this report, but it's also taking in my comment of that 10% discount, and it's adding it here too as a line item. So it's basically allowing me to write that comment. It's capturing who is the user, which in this case is my email right here. And when I submitted it, it's getting captured here.
So I want to really emphasize this. Yeah. I want to emphasize this point a lot here. This is really pretty impressive. This has been a requested feature pretty much since Power BI came out day one. Right away, people are like, wow, you've got these great tables of information, or you have comments or things that are on top of reports. How do users write back or put data back into a system? And this is an incredible feature that we're now able to get, and it's easy to build this in. And this is now, you mentioned user data functions, which is a recently released feature that came out at the Microsoft Fabric conference this last end of March, beginning of April. So this is going to enable this feature to be made. So we're basically calling a specific function, writing data back to a data system. In this example, I think you're using what, SQL database? Yeah.
Correct. So it's writing it back to a table in a SQL database.
And so because we're then able to connect to that SQL table using direct query, we can then go right back and recall the data as soon as it appears. So this is a really good use case of having direct query directly read the data from a SQL table, and it immediately appears inside the table. This is incredible. I love this. Great example.
Exactly. And it's not just about adding in new records. You can also do scenarios like edit. And so I'm just going to show really quickly. And because, visuals like the table and matrix visual, you can just easily copy in the data. So let's say I want to just copy this value of, I messed up, I said 10 per 15. So sorry there.
Yeah.
I can just go fix that like right. I'm just going and fixing this. I just make sure that the record is selected that I want to fix that for. And then I just simply hit edit comment. And so it's easy where I'm not even just adding in new comments, but I can go modify existing comments, whether they were my own comments or other people's comments as well that may have made certain mistakes.
Amazing.
And let's I want to delete. Let's go and say delete a comment. So let's say I think that this was not as helpful. I can go in and just remove this comment here, just like that as well. And so what you're seeing is really demonstrated here, the core different write-back scenarios of whether that's adding in records of data, whether that's modifying existing records or removing records. And keep in mind that the scenario doesn't have to be limited to just write-back. You can do so much more with it because ultimately it comes to like whatever you can automate.
And that's at the user data function level. The idea is like, so you could send a message to Teams. Exactly. You could send a message to a third-party data system. You could send an email. Like all these other things open up when you have functions available to you. You can build whatever the function can do. You can build it into whatever the data is going to be attached to.
And like a joke that we say on the team is like, you could even have a report that like opens up your garage door, like all that type of
amazing.
Like you can even interact with any of the IoT world, right? Like because a lot of IoT devices, they also have the ability to be called programmatically.
Awesome.
And so there's so many cool things that this is going to enable.
Wonderful. Love it.
So let's look through a couple of more examples here. This one, I want because it's really similar of just modifying a value, but this is also showcasing that you can do this for different like planning or budgeting scenarios as well. If you want to have your end user provide information about what was the budget and kind of compare that with actuals and derive forecasts from there. And then the other scenario I want to showcase is also the ability to do bulk updates too. So you saw me updating the comment as an individual comment, but let's say there might be things where you want to do multiple updates based on a filter criteria. So like more of like a bulk update, you can totally do that as well. So let's say in this example, I am filtering 2 different high-risk opportunities, ones with closing days of 70 and then a high amount of quantity. I can be like, okay, I want to go ahead and just like give these any opportunities that fit this filter criteria, I want to go and give them a 15% discount. So I can go here and add 15. And then when I'm doing submit, it's again passing that same filter context. The user data function is then going to that filter context in the SQL DB table and updating that value directly in the SQL DB table. And this one I can just show here if you see. If you want to get details on what happened, the user data function author can kind of give that string of what's happened here. So in this case, opportunities with high risk are updated. And you can see exactly which was the function that was used here behind the scenes. And
I just want to be clear what you're describing here. So on the filter section, these are data elements that exist inside the semantic model. And so we're not just passing a single row of data, we're actually passing potentially multiple data elements back to the function. And so every filter we're selecting on the left-hand side could be a separate data table with a single or multiple items selected that are getting passed over to the function. And then the function is able to read, like, again, the idea is you're packaging up data from the report, giving it to the function, and the function knows how to handle that. So you can build whatever intelligence you need into the function. This is really slick.
Exactly. And you can do so many cool things. Like you can basically not even just pass in like a specific value, but you can even like in some examples, like here I'm showing where I'm submitting the discount. In some cases, you don't want them to submit a discount, but you actually want them to go and request a discount that they're submitting. So imagine if instead of giving one set of users the ability to actually go and do the write back, you can have another set of users that they can't do the write back themselves, but they can request it. And what we could pass through the report is we can even pass what are the URL parameters for another report that can actually do the write back. And so imagine you have like an admin report that can actually do the write back. And then we pass the user parameters for that report. We pass the filter parameters for the URL. And so that way, what we can do in the user data function is we can essentially construct a link, like an approval link, for whoever's receiving that approval, construct a link where they can just click on that link, go to the report that does have the admin permissions to be able to write back and do that as well. So that way it helps a lot of different scenarios of whether you want to empower the end users themselves to do the write back themselves, like modify this value, or you want to have them where they're just requesting the discount and then you're constructing on the fly, taking in their filter context, constructing a URL to another report that can actually allow for the discount to be implied. And that goes to a different set of users that you want to.
This is a really interesting scenario here, because now this is actually decoupling the ability to have a single report in your process. So this is allowing users to kind of build multiple reports. And again, this is now just the creativity of the business unit, right? Whatever creativity you have in your scenario, you can now stitch or weave a process between multiple reports, potentially even multiple functions, right? There's a function just for requesting. There's a function for approving. And that is actually the actions you want to do. So now this can conform to whatever business process you feel is relevant. Think of this also, I'm trying to extrapolate this into another opportunity, right? I have a sales team. They're all over the world potentially using their mobile devices or looking at reports. They can request whatever they want. And then their sales manager, which again, we can know who's related to who's getting the requests or not. And we can route all that through the functions and let that manager know, hey, your sales team members have requested these discounts. Those can automatically go to the organization. And again, things are wide open here. You can go back to the Microsoft Graph. You can look up who a manager is or not, and all of that can be automated here. Again, all that's limiting you is how creative can you be inside your process and what you need for your business unit. This is awesome.
Exactly. And I think that it goes back to my point earlier of like, it's going to really change the way people think about reports, right? Because they're going to really think about it almost like they're like building a data application now, right? Like they're thinking about, okay, who's going to be using this app, right? And like, what do I want to allow them to do? What is their main action and their goals? And they're going to essentially tailor reports to that. And again, they could stitch multiple reports together and essentially have functions that are intended for different personas of whoever they're targeting and whatever goals they have. So I think a lot of really cool scenarios are going to be enabled.
Wonderful. Love it. This is super cool. All right. Any more demo pieces?
And yes, I want to save my favorite demo for last. And then after we showed this, I'll show you how I set up my favorite demo here.
Yeah, let's do it.
Full end to end. I'll show the setup after we see the quick demo of this. So one thing I think that is, in my opinion, one of the coolest things that Translytical can do is what I've been calling data augmentation. And it's the idea that you don't necessarily want to bring in all of the data from the get-go if it's not necessary. And I'm going to use this example here where we're collaborating with various influencers and that work at different companies. And obviously, we don't want to put every potential influencer we can collaborate with if we don't have like an active partnership with or a specific status of that partnership, right? And because that's a lot of information data of, figuring out, who they are, what's their name, what's their email address, etc. And also the maintenance work of keeping that up to date is quite a bit like heavy-handed. And also on the same time, it may not be that this is the right source system to keep that information up to date. And it probably isn't. And so what I like to do here is show a scenario where I'm going to bring in data on the fly from a different system. And so let's say I want to work with a partner with a company. I don't remember the exact point of contact. I just remember the name of the company. So in this case was Fashion Trends Inc. is the name of the company that I want to partner with. And let's say I'm going to type in Fashion Trends Inc. I'm just going to set a quick comment here is that I saw that this company wants to do an outdoor runway show. So they want an outdoor runway show. and they had this cool idea that they wanted to be on bikes for it. So they wanted the models to be on bikes for this runway show. Be on bikes. Okay, so now when I submit this function here, a few interesting things are going to happen. One, it's going to figure out for this given company, Fashion Trends Inc., it's going to figure out, okay, through another system, who is that point of contact, and get their information and write it back into this SQL DB table. So you notice I never typed in Robert Johnson. I never typed in his email. I never got his photo. I never went into any of that. But I'm getting that data on the fly. And the value of this too is even in the API that I'm using to get this data, I'm actually not even getting the image, but rather just by getting the username, I can dynamically craft a URL where I know how to find their image based on their username. And so I can even programmatically get their, or not programmatically, I can get it with a kind of dynamic URL string. I can dynamically get their image. So I'm not even actually pulling that from the API, but I'm getting it in the data model through a dynamic URL.
Love it.
And so the other cool thing here, and I didn't show this in some of the other examples, but you can also add data validation too. And it's not just input validation of, oh, you know, I expected a string here and you put a number, or sorry, I expected a number and you put a string, but it can also be validation of, let's say if I'm typing a company that doesn't exist, so food is not a company that exists here. And let's say I just type in something random here, just for demo purposes. So let's say I type in a company that doesn't exist, it will prevent me from adding a status for that company, because basically I have added a custom validation here where if I didn't find that company as a registered partner, throw this error. So essentially when I go to that other system, when I call an API to that other system and I see that food, the company doesn't exist, I can throw back a user error to ensure that I'm not putting, you know, garbage data into the DB or into the this.
I'm going to imagine here, if I'm thinking about that user experience, again, we're kind of now talking more about building a data application, which is incredible. We could even funnel back like, hey, here's a list of approved companies you can work with, right? So that way, if you typed in food, right, maybe it was Food Inc. or other kind of things you may want to be able to align, or that would then prevent or let you provide feedback to that user. Hey, you tried to enter this information. Here's the acceptable list of items that you can use, or I think you were trying to say this. Maybe you want to try this one instead, and you can now have the user create clean data. Is what you really wanted anyways, because now you're not messing things up and making trash data in your system.
And I think that, even with those guardrails in place, you can always, at the end of all these user data functions, always kick off an approval workflow, right? Like if you're not, if you're either scared that they may still find some ways to put garbage values, you can always do an approval workflow and have that human in the loop to make sure that you're okay adding that data into the database. And alternatively, I've seen folks discuss that maybe they could have like a staging table where they're totally fine for their end users to kind of write back to that. And then kind of an admin persona that can figure out, okay, how do they take the staging table, what's in the staging table, and modify the kind of main production table. So that could be there could be a separate report that essentially takes what's in the staging table and figures out, okay, which verifies it, figure it out, okay, which of these should go to the production table, and a separate report.
I also imagine here, if you're thinking about this as well, like there's also scenarios, and I hear this asked a lot, especially in, write back scenarios, right? What if I want to track all the versions of that record, or what I changed over time, like the slowly changing dimension type problem? That sounds like this also could be supported here. And again, it's not a limitation of the functions and what you're doing here, just a matter of how you design the system. Does your SQL database allow you to create the same record multiple times? And then the view you pull in using direct query has like the current record of whatever those records are. So now you can not only track, what was that sales opportunity or what was the status of this, but then you can track the status over time. What does that look like?
Yeah.
So all of that can also be incorporated in your process as well.
Exactly. And even in your process, you can even have your own table that's even doing a write back of exactly, the history of different inputs or different submissions that users have done as well. So you can do that. You can really, really customize this however you want. So it's really powerful.
So let's see the horsepower underneath the hood here. We've got this beautiful looking report.
And actually, before we do that, I want to show one last AI thing. Of course, in the age of AI, we have to showcase some AI integrated into this experience. And one thing I'll add that's really cool, because like I said, with the value of automation is you can customize things however you want. And that has great application when you think of AI, because one thing when you look at kind of built-in AI solutions is sometimes they're not always sure what data you want to pass, or they may only pass metadata, but you may want to actually provide certain data to get a better output. And here you can do that. So what I'm going to showcase here, I'll first show a demo, and then I'm going to showcase how I built this. But let's say, with data, it's like sometimes you want suggestions of, okay, you gave me this information. What next? What should I do with this? So let's have AI help us with our creativity here, and help us plan how can we get Robert Johnson to come and collaborate with us? Like, how can we influence him to come and collaborate with us? And we're going to use Azure OpenAI to help generate an AI suggestion for this. And so what's happening here is I actually am passing in some of Robert Johnson's information. And in this case, I'm passing in his name, his company, and his latest feedback, which in this case that he wanted to do this outdoor runway show. And look at the idea that's giving me here is saying, okay, why don't we pitch this like custom Contoso bikes for the runway? We can make them like centerpieces. We can even integrate kind of the style and sustainability elements in this. And so it's really helping kind of with the creative juices here, and leveraging AI in a very custom tailored solution, and really ensuring that I have like those guardrails around what's the prompt that I'm asking AI, and guardrails around what data that I choose to send to Azure.
This is the idea of where the Azure function can do a little bit of, we're going to call it kind of pre-prompting, right? There's a prompt that you're submitting here, but you could also add additional context to that prompt. Imagine I'm a marketing person. Imagine I'm reaching out to this person for the first time. And you can kind of, craft the scenario. That way, the suggestion that comes back is extremely relevant to what you're trying to communicate to that user, or how you're trying to leverage that AI prompting scenario. And that's something we don't really get today in a lot of Power BI. We don't have the ability to pre-prompt a lot of the AI solutions. This is one place where we can customize that in the function itself.
Exactly. And I think, it's both customizing the prompt, and also in a lot of the current solutions today, not just in Power BI, but in a lot of the generic AI solutions, is they will typically only pass metadata and not the entire data. And obviously many customers don't want you to pass the entire data, but they may have specific cherry pick items that they're willing to pass. And this allows you to do that. And imagine too, it's like you can even take this and integrate this with more places. Like imagine I had a button here where instead of crafting this as a plan, I craft this as an email body. And then I have a button here that will allow me to just go out and directly send that as an email.
Awesome.
So I'm shortcutting so many things where I'm automating not only the ideas of how do I kind of pitch to Robert, but I'm also could be automating the email that I send to Robert. And it just makes my workflow so much faster. And it really keeps me in mainly the context of the report without having to go to a lot of other systems.
I imagine this pitch plan could be like a part of the input items that you would then use somewhere else to keep going forward with this, right? So, use this one, make another function, take the pitch plan and shove it into an email body. Like, oh, craft my email for me. Like you could keep going down that route and kind of refining.
Track the email.
Make me a social media post around what this might look like. You could even do like a lot of other things that this kind of keep bolting on. This is super slick. Love it.
It's super, and so now you saw a bunch of different demos. I'm gonna dive into the code a bit. So let me first start with, I'll show the code for the scenario where I'm augmenting the data on the fly. So let's see that code first, and then later I'll show the Azure OpenAI example. And so for folks that haven't seen the user data functions experience, basically it's allowing you in Fabric itself. So natively in Fabric, you're able to write code, deploy code, integrate different Python libraries, and even have native integration with Fabric sources. So let me show a little bit of that here. So in this case, I'm doing that write back to that SQL DB. And so you can see here, that's the name of my database here. And so I'm using user data functions to automatically manage the credentials here. So you're not seeing any, passwords or credentials stored in text. Like I'm essentially, the user data function is doing the heavy lifting of managing that connection. And so I'm just calling out what that connection is, giving it a name, and I'm passing it to this user data function. And in this user data function, you notice that it is taking in that company name that I passed in, the status that I provided. So whether it was initiated, in review, I'm taking in the current date. So the date in which I submitted that comment, and then I'm taking in the comment. And now what, again, like I mentioned, is you always want to do certain like error handling. So I can do some error handling here. That you saw. And then here's where I'm doing that external API call. Obviously, this is a fake API, but you can use a real API here. And so using the request library, so I'm importing this request library here. And also you can add additional libraries by clicking here, add from the Python libraries. You can search for whatever library you want and then add it there. And then here I'm doing a check for that company, right? So I'm seeing if they're a registered company. So if the company exists within that API, I'm going to do various kind of collecting that user information that you saw there of who's the latest point of contact, get their username and all of that. So that's where I'm kind of collecting that data. And then I'm also checking in if that company already has an existing status. Because if they already have an existing status, I just need to do an update, right? Where I just need to update their status. If they're not yet have a partnership, we never initiated a partnership, then I can do an insert. So kind of having that logic of really customizing whether you're doing an edit scenario or whether you're doing an add scenario. And then you can, of course, once you have that SQL statement, you execute it, and then you commit the transaction, and then you can close the connection. And then finally, you can return. So one important thing to note is all of these user data functions require you to submit back a string. And so whether a string that was successful, so in this case, collab with the company is now whatever the status was. So in this case, initiated is what I would return. And then, of course, if let's say we didn't find that company in the API, so if it didn't go into this, it went through this for loop and it didn't find the company, then that means you reach this part of the code, and that's where we'll throw the error that this company is not a registered partner.
And this,
and you saw like this is not that many lines of code to do this really, and like I mentioned again, is I don't have a ton of recent coding experience, and this wasn't something that I think that as long as you have some assistance with GitHub Copilot and you can do some a little bit of learning and validation, I think it is totally achievable to achieve some of these like more smaller.
And I also want to call it here too. This is all written in Python. So this is a full Python notebook. Again, a very common language. The reason I bring this up is if you need help with these kind of things, like to your point, there's a lot of Copilots. Copilot is actually really good at producing Python scripts and Python code. Define for me a function that does X, Y, Z things. Python's really good at giving you great outputs from a Copilot. So like that works really well. And also I'll point out, you can throw a stone and hit a Python developer nowadays because they're everywhere. You can always go find someone to help you write some Python code. And I really like the idea that you have these very simple like @UDF connection, boom, SQL database. Great. What's the alias? That's the Translytical database. Like, so having these really good helper functions here as well, like you're managing the connection other places, makes it really easy for you to integrate with those data tables. Love this. This is a great example.
And now let me move on to my last example of a function here. So in this case, this is the one where we're doing a little bit of prompt engineering. So this one is also taking the SQL DB connection, and it's taking the company. And what I do first is I'm going to read from the database of that company, and I'm just going to go and like just fetch the username, or sorry, the customer name, and get their latest comment. So in this case, I don't need to go to the separate API and get it, because I also want to get what is their latest comment, because I'm going to use that to pass it to get their plan. And so I get their name and I get their latest comment. And then I have this prompt here. And again, you can customize this prompt however you want. So in this case, I say respond with a short plan. I want it to keep it quite short, so under 240 characters. And then I give a scenario of that I'm working at this company, and then I'm trying to collaborate with different influencers and offer them custom bikes. And then I said, pretend we want to collaborate with the following influencer. I give their name, I give what company they're from, and I said, here's a comment about their latest feedback. And that's it. That's all the data I'm passing. I don't have to feel like I have to pass the whole entire information about the company or the customer. And then I can just get a plan from that. And then of course you can configure exactly which model you want to use here. And I won't show my API key, but of course you'll put yours.
And since this is inside Azure, I'm going to be very clear here. Like, some people are very hesitant about just using random open AI or AI in general, right? So then, since this is owned by your company potentially, right? This could be, and this is a model that's inside your Azure environment. It's deployed by your team, your company. Therefore, you have no risk of this being trained on somewhere else, or you're not using an open source AI that may use your prompt as part of the training for something else. So you have full confidence that this is secure, because you're controlling this in your own Azure environment. So I just want to point out the security level of this, very high, using it inside what your IT group would be able to say, yeah, this is good. We know what we do. We feel like we have control of the AI and what it's doing here. So I just want to also call it out. It's a very big bonus.
And one other thing, I didn't mention this earlier, but you can also manage security on the user data function. So basically you can figure out exactly who gets what permissions. So whether they get permissions to share, whether they get permissions to edit properties of the user data functions, and also whether they have permission. Of course, the most important one is who has permissions to execute this function and also view the function logs. So I think this is like really helping you ensure that if there's someone you don't want to give permission to run the function, you can ensure that they can't run that specific function. So you can create, different variations of the function and choose which ones users can run, which ones other users cannot run.
Excellent. That's great. Yeah, good point.
And then one thing I want to note as a current limitation is, so the current limitation is that in terms of who can edit the function, like in terms of the code, right now it's restricted to the owner of the function. But that's something that over time we want to enable it where you can have multiple people that can go and edit this function, and it's not just restricted to whoever is the creator or owner of the function.
Love it.
And the other thing I'll mention as well is right now you're seeing in Python. We do have on the roadmap where we enabled this in C# as well. So if you're more comfortable with C#, that would be an option coming soon for user data functions.
So likely that'll continue just to extend, because there's just a lot of good languages that are out there. Python, thinking like JavaScript or TypeScript or other languages. C#. Yeah. There'll probably be a growth of other languages over time, but for now we're starting with the Python. That's how functions are released today. So real quick, I think this is a great example of showing us all the things that inside the code. Do you mind, or do you have the opportunity? Can we look at the report and say,
yes.
So now we have the function, we have the report. How do you connect the two? Like, how do we make sure that those look correct and join together so we can have that complete story there?
Yeah, let me show this with this example here.
Yeah, great.
So let's make sure I have my feature switch enabled. So what the magic that's happening in the report is we've introduced a new action type for buttons. And that action type is called data function. And with what data function is doing is just like how with other like integrated fabric experiences, you choose the workspace you want, you choose the function set, and then that's where I'm picking this data function that I have here. And when I select the data function, you're automatically going to see what are the required input parameters for this
Love
function.
it.
And so
Awesome.
here really what it's about, the main piece of the report is like you have to figure out what fields or inputs map to the parameter inputs. And
Nice.
this can be mapped not just to data, but also mapped to input slicers, right? Like input coming from slicers. And one thing to call out is that, so I'll give an example here. Let me actually showcase so that you can see the slicer names. Let me open up the selection pane here.
Sure.
So, for example, let's say I have this text slicer for company name. So you may be wondering, what is the status, comment, and company? Why are those the only ones that's showing up? And the reason being is because these are the new slicer inputs that are supported. And so with the new slicers that are coming, both they're actually released, the text slicer, the new button slicer, and the list slicer, those will automatically be detected here where you can directly take slicer input and map it. So rather than you spend time creating your own DAX measure to get, okay, this is the selected value of this slicer, you can just automatically just pick the slicer, just streamlines a lot of the setup.
Yeah.
So in this case, if we look at it, it corresponds to company name. Here's the name of the slicer. This name of this slicer is this status. And then this last name of the slicer is comment. And so that's what you see here is that this is exactly matching to that text input slicer for company name.
Now I get it.
And we can set it to auto clear right after it submits.
Yep.
This is mapped to the status slicer, and then this is finally the comment slicer. And of course, like always, you can map it to data values. So in this case, I have a measure for the current date and time called today.
Yep.
And I'm just mapping that to that measure.
Yeah.
And you can imagine like whatever measure you want to create and customize. So like I mentioned before, there could be a scenario where you want to pass in a dynamic URL. You can have the measure be a URL that you crafted. And maybe that URL can go to a certain like approval site in the scenario that I mentioned.
Love it.
And then the other cool thing here is we can style and customize different states. And so the really important state here that I would say is that loading state. I think that's like the new one. That's the new one that you haven't seen before, is that notion of there is this loading state because we are running that user data function and you need to give some indication that it's submitting and running. And so you can really just customize that text here for submitting. And you can go ahead and even customize the icon. So in this case, I had that spinner icon that you saw, customizing that and its placement, and customizing, the location of that spinner icon as well as the size of it. So a ton of different formatting options to really deliver like a very heavy like app experience feeling, right?
Sure.
It's not feeling, it'll feel very polished, right? Like it'll feel like a very polished application to users because you have all those like interactions that you can go and customize.
This is very well thought out. I'm really excited to see all these new features and play with this a bit more now. So anything else you want to demo before we kind of wrap and call it a good, successful demo? Everything went well. Nothing broke. It all ran smoothly. Great job on the demo.
Yeah, it actually went. Yeah, I was surprised. I was like, this went super well. I told Mike beforehand was that like if the functions are running too long, like we'll just keep talking.
We need to dance a little.
But everything went like really smooth.
It was great.
Like very smooth.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think the last thing I'll say is like I'm so looking forward to seeing like what scenarios that you guys create. And I'm just excited to see like anything that you guys have the power to automate, go and automate it. We're really looking forward to even seeing crazy scenarios and fun scenarios, like opening your garage door,
turning on lights.
We're super excited.
Who knows?
Yeah, turning on lights, all of that.
Awesome.
And the last thing I'd mention is this is also using, this isn't done in partnership with a lot of different folks. This wasn't just the Power BI team. This was the user data functions team. This was the SQL team. So there was a lot of folks that were involved. In fact, we don't just call this a feature, we call this a capability because it involves so many features kind of coming together to enable translytical task flows.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Sujata, for your time. I thank you for the demo. It was very well done. I'm excited to do more work with translytical workflows and having them incorporated in your reports. I'm also excited to see what the community comes up with. So with that being said, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it. And we'll see you next time.
Awesome. Thank you, Mike. And thank you, everyone.